The red and blue lights lit up the cracked pavement like a strobe, flashing against the nearby brick walls of the convenience store. Sirens had died down now, but tension still hung in the air like smoke after fireworks. Malik Walker stood with his hands raised, his backpack unzipped on the hood of the patrol car. His heart beat so loud he swore the cops could hear it. He was 13, he was walking home, that's all, but apparently that was suspicious enough. "What's in the bag?" the older officer asked again, shining his flashlight directly into Malik's face. "School stuff. Some snacks." "Right," the cop scoffed, flipping through Malik's sketchpad and pulling out his pack of granola bars like they were bricks of gold. Another officer, younger and clearly enjoying the moment, laughed. "You got ID, little man? I'm 13, and you're walking alone this late, huh?" "It's barely 8:30, Malik muttered. He wished he hadn't. The younger cop stepped closer, his smile fading. "You got an attitude now?" Malik swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his palms slick with sweat. He had seen videos like this, too many. Some of them didn't end with the kid going home, but he wasn't going to let fear choke him. Not tonight. "My dad's coming to get me," he said, voice steady even as his knees felt like jelly. "Oh yeah?" The older cop leaned in. "Who's daddy? Pastor? Janitor?" Malik met his eyes. "He's Special Forces. Retired now, but he's trained. He was Delta." Silence. Then laughter. Loud, mocking laughter that made Malik's ears burn and his stomach turn. "Delta Force?" the younger cop wheezed. "Kid, did you pull that from a video game?" "You watch too many movies, Junior," the older one added. "Ain't nobody coming for you but your mama." That's when it happened. A black SUV rolled up to the curb, smooth, silent, tinted windows. It didn't screech or flash its lights. It just appeared. The doors opened, and out stepped a man in plain jeans, boots, and a dark jacket zipped to the collar. He walked like gravity bowed to him. No hesitation, no fear. His face was unreadable. His eyes, cold steel. "Malik," the man said calmly. "Dad," Malik breathed. The cops turned, their smug grins evaporating as the man stepped closer. His voice was calm, but every word hit like a knife sliding into silence. "Is there a reason," he asked, "why my son is being detained?" The older cop shifted. "Sir, he fit the description. Look, we were just—" The man pulled a small badge from his inside jacket pocket, flipping it open with practiced ease. It wasn't a police badge, it was something different. The younger cop blinked, his eyes darting between the insignia and the man's face. The air changed. Like someone had vacuumed the oxygen right out of it. James Walker didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, but everyone around him suddenly remembered how to be very quiet. "I suggest you return my son's belongings," James said, his voice steady as a sniper's aim, "and give me the name of your supervising officer." The older cop nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." James turned to Malik. "You okay?" Malik nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah. Yeah." The officers scrambled to repack his bag, the younger one mumbling an apology that sounded like he'd forgotten how words worked. As James and Malik walked toward the SUV, Malik looked up at his father. "I didn't lie," he said, just loud enough for the cops to hear. "I told them who you were." James didn't smile, not yet, but he squeezed his son's shoulder and said the words that grounded him like nothing else ever could. "I know you did." They got in the car, drove away. The lights behind them faded into the night. Back on that sidewalk, two officers stood still, staring at the empty space where the man had been, where the boy had told the truth no one believed, and for the first time they wondered what it must feel like to laugh at a legend, and then meet him in real life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The garage smelled like gun oil, old leather, and cedar wood. Malik always said it was the most dad-smelling place on earth, and he meant that in the best way. Inside, James Walker sat at his workbench, fingers moving with calm precision as he disassembled a battered old watch. Not a military-grade piece, not some tactical tool, just a vintage Timex with a scratched face and a cracked band. It had been his father's, And it still ticked, somehow. Outside, crickets chirped. Somewhere in the kitchen, Angela was making tea. And upstairs, Malik was supposed to be asleep, though James knew his son would be wide awake, replaying every second of what happened with those cops. James sighed. Not because he was tired, but because he wasn't. Not really. Men like him rarely slept through the night. Years of war had rewired something in his brain. Sleep came in short, light bursts, like naps with your boots on. He wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. That part of him had been scorched clean overseas. He didn't react. He calculated. He waited. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Seeing Malik like that, hands up, face pale, treated like a criminal for existing, stirred something ancient in him. Something he'd buried under layers of discipline and silence. He closed the watch gently and leaned back. Angela appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs in hand. She wore a loose grey sweater and no makeup, her curls tied back in a soft puff. "You should talk to him," she said, handing him a mug. "I will. You can't wait too long, James. He needs to know what kind of world he's up against and what kind of man he comes from." He nodded slowly. "I know." Angela sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. It had been 14 years since James Walker had left Delta Force, 14 years since the mission in Kandahar that changed everything, the one that left his best friend, Marcus Sully Sullivan, in pieces, and left James with a scar that wasn't visible to anyone else. He hadn't quit because he was weak. He quit because one day, after too many nights staring into the eyes of boys holding rifles they were too small to carry, he stopped recognizing his own reflection. He met Angela during a deployment in Sudan. She was there with an international medical team. She patched him up after a convoy ambush, 7 stitches across the thigh, a hairline fracture in his wrist. He stayed for 5 extra days just to talk to her. By the time they flew home, he'd already decided he wasn't going back. They built their life in a quiet Virginia town. James took consulting gigs, taught security protocols, trained officers, the kind who wanted to be better. Angela worked in trauma recovery, focusing on kids from hard-hit neighborhoods. Then came Malik, all wide eyes, stubborn curiosity, and that Walker grit. James taught him everything, not how to fight, but how to think, how to read a room, stay calm, walk away if you can. Tonight had shaken that foundation. "He thinks he did something wrong," Angela whispered. "You saw it in his eyes." "He didn't." "I know that. You know that. But he's 13. He's trying to process the fact that the world sees him as a threat before they even see him as a boy." James nodded. "I'll talk to him in the morning." Angela looked at him over her tea. "Talk to him like a dad, not a soldier." He smiled faintly. "That might be the hardest mission I've had yet." She smiled back and kissed his temple before heading upstairs. Alone again, James looked down at his hands, the same hands that had held rifles, built shelters, carried wounded men out of fire. These days, they fixed watches and tied shoelaces, but the instinct never left. Protect, secure, survive. He stood, walked quietly up the stairs, and paused outside Malik's door. Light peeked from the gap at the bottom. He knocked softly. "You awake?" "Yeah," came the voice. "Small, tired." James opened the door. Malik sat cross-legged on his bed, still in his hoodie, the room dark except for the soft blue glow of his nightlight, a tiny astronaut floating in plastic space. "I keep thinking about it," Malik said. "I know. I didn't do anything wrong. I know that too. Then why'd they treat me like I did?" James sat beside him, hand on the edge of the mattress. "Because sometimes people don't need a reason to see you as a threat. They see your skin, your height, your hoodie, and they make up the rest in their head. That's not fair, and no, it's not. Did that happen to you?" James looked at his son. "More times than I can count." Malik was quiet for a moment. "You didn't even yell when you showed up. You just were. They looked scared. I wasn't there to scare them. I was there for you. But you weren't scared either." James shook his head. "I've been shot at, bombed, betrayed, and hunted halfway across the world. But nothing scares me more than the idea of losing you." Malik blinked, surprised. "I mean it," James said. And you need to know something else. What? I'm not always gonna be there to walk up and fix it. But everything I've learned, every mission, every skill, every ounce of discipline I have, is now yours. I'm going to teach you not just how to survive this world, but how to command it. Malik didn't say anything at first, but his posture shifted. His breath slowed. He finally looked up. Can I learn how to drive the SUV? James smiled. One step at a time, soldier. They both laughed, the first real laugh since that night began, and in that moment, surrounded by darkness, a new kind of light sparked between them. Monday morning hit different. It wasn't the alarm that got to Malik. It was the silence. That heavy, loaded kind that sits in the air like fog. At school, even the regular sounds, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on tile, the low buzz of kids trying to pretend they're not tired, felt distant. And Malik felt watched. He walked the halls of Jefferson Middle with his hoodie tucked into his backpack, shoulders tight. He could feel the stares before they landed. Kids whispering, teachers glancing longer than usual. Some of the students had seen the video or heard about it through someone who did. The clip wasn't long, maybe 20 seconds. Someone had filmed the end of it from across the street, just long enough to catch Malik, hands raised, surrounded by cops. And his father stepping out of that black SUV like something out of a movie. Someone had put it on TikTok with the caption, "Kid says his dad's special forces. No one believes him. Then this happens." And just like that, Malik Walker was that kid. "Hey Malik," a voice called from behind him as he opened his locker. "Where's your bodyguard today?" He turned. It was Ryan, the loud kid from homeroom who thought sarcasm was a personality. Malik said nothing, just kept grabbing his books. "I'm just saying," Ryan continued, "you couldn't have picked something more believable? Like your dad's an astronaut or something? You really went full Call of Duty." Another kid behind Ryan laughed. "Delta Force, bro, so dramatic." Malik slammed his locker a little harder than necessary and turned to face them. "You guys." "Done?" Ryan raised his hands. "Relax, dude, just messing around." "I wasn't." That shut them up. For now. But as Malik walked away, he could still feel the eyes. Even in first period, Ms. Jeffries paused when she saw him come in, giving him a quick, cautious smile. "Good to have you back, Malik." He nodded, slid into his seat, and tried to disappear. But he couldn't. Not today. Not when every glance felt like a question. Not when even friends looked at him like he was carrying a secret he hadn't earned. After lunch, he finally found a safe moment, behind the band room, next to the music wing, where no one really went during fourth period. He leaned against the wall, pulled his hoodie over his head and closed his eyes. He wasn't trying to cry. That wasn't his thing. But he hated the way everything suddenly felt wrong. Like he didn't even own his story anymore. Like his life had turned into someone else's viral post. A soft voice interrupted him. "Hey." It was Ava, braids round. Glasses? Hoodie 2 sizes too big. She was in his art class. Quiet, smart, always sketching in the margins of her notebook. "I saw the video," she said, leaning against the wall next to him. "Yeah, cool," Malik mumbled. "Whole school did. You okay?" He shrugged. "Why wouldn't I be? I only got stopped by cops, mocked by classmates, and turned into a meme. Totally fine." Ava didn't laugh. She nodded slowly. "My cousin got stopped last year, coming home from the library. They thought his laptop was stolen." Malik looked at her. She wasn't pitying him. She got it. "It's messed up," he said quietly. "Yeah, but it doesn't make you weak." He hesitated. "Feels like it does." "You didn't freeze. You stood your ground. And your dad showing up like that?" She grinned. "You know people are calling him the Black John. Wick online?" That made Malik snort. "I'm serious," she said, smiling. "But for real, and don't let them make you feel small for telling the truth. That's what they want." He looked at her. Really looked this time. She wasn't trying to fix him. She was just there, real, steady. "Thanks," he said. They stood in silence for a bit, the kind that felt more like peace than awkwardness. Finally, Malik spoke again. "You draw?" Ava nodded. "Mostly people, faces, stories. Can you show me sometime?" "Sure," she said, But only if you tell me the real version of what happened that night. He smiled, a real one this time. Deal. The bell rang. They walked back together, not saying much, but something had shifted. Malik might still be that kid to some people, but he was starting to remember he was also this kid, the one with a story worth owning, not hiding from. Afghanistan. 9 years ago, the desert was a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful, not still, just waiting. James crouched behind a rusted-out transport truck, dust caking the sweat on his neck, rifle raised and eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was low, bleeding orange into a sky so wide it felt like it could swallow the earth. Beside him, Marcus Sully Sullivan adjusted his earpiece, muttering into the comm. Bravo 1 to Eagle, we got movement on the eastern ridge. Looks like 6, maybe more. James didn't blink. Visual, thermal. Nothing friendly. A third voice came through the channel, sharp and commanding. Hold position, wait for my go. James exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing behind mirrored shades. His fingers tapped the trigger guard in rhythm. 1, 2, 3. It was supposed to be routine. Secure a downed intel drone. Retrieve the black box. In and out. But nothing in this region was ever routine. Sully elbowed him. You feel that? James nodded. Something's off. They'd been in country for 6 weeks, operated mostly at night under strict blackout protocols. His team, small, surgical, elite, was trained for chaos. They were the kind of men who could clear a compound in 30 seconds and be out, before the dust settled. But this time the enemy was waiting. The first shot rang out like thunder. Then everything went to hell. Bullets pinged off the metal hull behind them. James shoved Sully down and returned fire, quick bursts aimed at muzzle. Flashes in the distance, sand exploded around them. A grenade whistled past, hitting just left of the truck and flipping a nearby ATV in flames. Ambush, Sully shouted. It's a damn setup. James's comm cracked to life, garbled, panicked voices. We're surrounded. Lost visual. Fall back. Then static. James grabbed Sully's vest, yanked him behind cover and tried to regroup. But it was too late. The next explosion hit close. Too close. Heat, shrapnel, screams. James opened his eyes, ears ringing. His vision swam. Dust and blood blurred the edges. He tried to sit up. Pain screamed through his side. His rifle was gone. Sully. Where was Sully? He crawled through the smoke, dragging his body toward a broken shadow curled against the rocks. Sully was on his back, eyes glassy, chest heaving in ragged gasps. James reached him. I got you, man. You're gonna be okay. You hear me? Sully blinked once. Blood bubbled at his lips. I told you. Sully choked, a faint smile cracking through pain. That drone wasn't worth it. James pressed down on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Shut up, Sully. Stay with me. I'm not scared, Sully whispered. I know. But I'm tired. James shook his head. Just hang on, bird's coming, we're getting out. Sully didn't answer. By the time the evac arrived, there were 4 men alive. Sully wasn't one of them. James flew home with a chest full of medals and a heart full of ghosts. Virginia. Present day. The garage was silent again. The only sound was the ticking of the old Timex. James sat in the chair by the workbench, staring at the wall, but seeing another world. He didn't talk about Sully, not even to Angela. Sometimes in his dreams he could still feel the grit of the sand in his teeth, hear the buzz of the comms, see Sully's eyes right before they faded. He kept the patch from that mission, black and faded, stitched with the letters B7 Razor, in the back of a drawer he never opened. Some wounds didn't heal. They just changed shape. And now, watching his son deal with a different kind of war, a quieter, more insidious one, James felt that weight return. Not guilt, not even grief. Duty. He had promised Sully he'd do better, be better, not just in combat, but here, at home, where the real battles were quieter and the stakes were just as high. A soft knock on the garage door broke his thoughts. Malik stepped in, still in his school clothes, a sketchbook tucked under one arm. Hey, he said. James straightened. Hey, can I hang out here for a bit? Always. Malik sat beside him. Mom said you were thinking about teaching me something. James smiled faintly. I've got a few lessons. Like what? James looked at him, not as a boy, not even as his son, but as someone stepping toward manhood. How to stay calm under pressure. How to read a room. How to know when to fight. And when not to. Malik nodded. I want to learn. You will. There was a pause. Then Malik opened his sketchbook and turned it around. It was a pencil drawing, rough but powerful. 2 figures in the middle of a storm. One small, one large. The smaller one had his hands up. The larger one stood tall beside him, arms crossed, calm but unshakable. James stared at it for a long time. Is that supposed to be us? Malik smiled. Yeah. James swallowed hard. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't fix the past. But in that moment, it gave him something stronger than silence ever could. Hope. By Wednesday morning, the video had gone viral. Not just school, gossip viral. National viral local news ran it under headlines like Teens claim about military dad shocks officers and black father's silent show of strength stops police cold. Within 2 days, it was on CNN's morning scroll and had crossed over to TikTok commentary, Reddit threads, and even a segment on The Daily Show. Malik hadn't posted it. Neither had James. But the internet didn't need permission. It took the clip and ran with it. Some people called it inspiring, others didn't. Kid was being dramatic. Cops were just doing their job. His dad walked in like he was Captain America or something. Please. Another race-baiting headline. Stop making everything political. James read the comments once, just once. He never made that mistake again. But he did notice something else. Something he couldn't ignore. Within hours of the video's spread, the same 2 officers who had stopped Malik were placed on administrative leave. No charges, no real accountability. Just leave. Then came the knock on the front door. James opened it to find Deputy Chief Elena Brooks, crisp in uniform, her grey-streaked hair pulled tight and professional. She extended a hand. Mr. Walker, thank you for seeing me. James didn't shake her hand. She lowered it slowly. I imagine you're getting a lot of calls, he said. I am, including from Washington. Bet they care a lot when cameras are rolling. Brooks didn't flinch. You're not wrong, but I didn't come here to do damage control. I came to ask for your help. James raised an eyebrow. Help? We're Delta Force. You know threat assessment, protocol, calm under pressure. That night, you kept your head. We need people like that training our force. I already train people, James said coolly. I just didn't expect I'd need to do it in my own front yard. Brooks nodded. I know how this looks. No, James cut in. You don't. You've never had to watch your son, 13 years old, stand under flashing lights like a suspect because of his skin. Silence. The kind that said she knew she couldn't argue. I'm not asking for an apology, James continued, and I don't need a photo op. What I want is for your department to stop acting like fear is a justification for incompetence. Brooks took a breath. Then come in. Not as a headline, as a consultant. I'll push it through. You write the curriculum, run the training, build the bridge. James crossed his arms. Why now? She looked at him dead on. Because the world is watching. A pause. Then James spoke, voice low. I'll think about it. That night, over dinner, Angela raised an eyebrow as James poked at his food. What's the strategy face for? Deputy. Chief came to the house. Angela froze. What did she want? For me to help train their officers. Angela set her fork down. You thinking about it? James nodded slowly. Thinking... Yeah. But part of me wonders if it's just another way to keep me quiet. Angela leaned in. You've never been the quiet type. Malik, listening from the other end of the table, finally spoke up. If you can make it better for someone else's kid, maybe it's worth it. James looked at him. Really looked. The kid who used to climb the stairs in cardboard armor. Who once cried because he couldn't beat the final level in Halo 3. Who now sat there talking like a man in the making. James smiled faintly. Maybe it is. The next morning, James called the department. "I'm in," he said simply, "but we do it my way." 2 weeks later, the police training center looked more like a military base that morning. Obstacle courses, sandpits, firing ranges. But inside it was all suits and tension. James stood in front of a whiteboard in a grey button-down, sleeves rolled up, clean cut but unmistakably in command. 25 officers sat in the room. Most looked skeptical. A few looked defensive. 1 or 2 looked genuinely curious. He started without introduction. "Raise your hand if you've ever been in a situation where you let fear make the decision for you." No one moved. James smiled coldly. "Exactly." He tossed a thick folder onto the table. "That fear, when untrained, when unchecked, becomes a weapon. And it doesn't just hurt civilians, it kills people, and it ruins the good cops who never wanted blood on their hands." Silence. "You're not here to look good. You're here to get better." A few officers shifted in their seats. One in. The back raised a hand. "You the guy from the video?" James looked at him. "I'm the guy who raised the kid in the video." That landed like a punch. James continued. "This isn't about politics. It's about survival. Yours and mine and my son's. Let's get to work." Meanwhile, Malik scrolled through a new post trending under the hashtag Malik Walker. Clips from James's first session had leaked. Again. But this time the internet wasn't laughing. This time, they were listening. 3 weeks later, the sound of sirens in the distance was almost comforting at this point. The constant hum of chaos, the drones of police scanners, and the ever-looming threat of the next headline, it had become the soundtrack of their lives. Malik's phone buzzed with another notification. "Breaking. Malik Walker training. Session goes viral. Is it enough to change the narrative on police reform?" He scrolled through the comments. "Walker for president. This guy gets it." Finally, someone standing up. "Let's make this the norm." "Hope it works, but cops aren't going to change, not for real." Malik paused for a moment, reading the mixed reactions. Some were supportive. Others were ready to burn the whole thing down. But through it all, one thing was clear. His father had started something. He wasn't sure if it was good or bad yet. The training sessions had been intense. His dad had stayed late every night, and their kitchen was filled with stacks of files, training materials, and tactical gear. Sometimes, Malik overheard arguments about the future of policing, the responsibility of those in power, and the consequences of their failure. James was playing a dangerous game. One wrong move and they could both end up worse than before. "Hey Malik, you good?" Ava's voice interrupted his thoughts. She'd been quiet lately, but the weight of the viral moment had hit everyone. She slipped into the seat next to him at lunch, her sketchbook open. "I'm fine," Malik lied, throwing his phone into his bag. "Just thinking." Ava studied him. "You've been thinking a lot lately." "About your dad?" Malik nodded slowly. "Yeah. I just don't know if it's enough. I mean, people are already looking for him to fix everything. What if he can't?" Ava didn't answer immediately. She just flipped through the pages of her sketchbook until she found something, and then slid it across the table to him. It was a drawing of a large flame, wild and furious, reaching into the sky. But within the fire was a silhouette. Someone, standing tall, hands raised, calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "That's how I see your dad," she said softly. "He's like the fire that starts everything. People will follow, some will burn, but there's a purpose to it. Just make sure you're not standing too close." Malik stared at the drawing. For the first time he understood what Ava meant. His father was an incendiary force, a catalyst. His presence alone could ignite a movement, but there would always be people who wanted to control the flame or snuff it out. The next day, the air in the training room was thick, charged with anticipation. Today the press was coming. Not just local reporters, but national news outlets too. James had tried to keep it quiet, but that wasn't how things worked anymore. The moment the video of him training officers had leaked, the floodgates had opened. The door to the room swung open, and reporters flooded in with their cameras, notebooks, and microphones. Malik was sitting in the corner, trying to stay out of the way, when a reporter from Fox News approached him. "Malik, can I ask you a few questions?" she asked, her microphone poised. Malik hesitated, then nodded. Sure. Your father is making waves with his new police training initiative. Do you think it's enough to make real change? He swallowed. I don't know, I hope it is. But change takes time and trust. And do you trust the police? She pressed. Malik's eyes flicked to the corner of the room where his father stood, reviewing the day's schedule with a few officers. The fire in the room was undeniable, but so was the tension. He remembered the way the cops had treated him, the way they had looked at him. There was no easy answer. I trust my dad, Malik said quietly, but that's different. It's not about whether I trust them. It's about whether they deserve it. The reporter didn't seem satisfied with the answer, but the cameras were already moving on. Malik sat back down, feeling the weight of the spotlight pressing in. He wasn't prepared for this. He didn't know how his father could withstand it. Later that evening, James stood in front of a large mirror in the hallway, adjusting his shirt. Malik could see the tension in his movements, the way his father's eyes darted to the reflection, haunted by something only he could see. Dad? Malik spoke up, voice quieter than he intended. You're doing something big. James nodded without looking at him. I have to. But what if it gets worse? James finally turned, meeting his son's gaze. The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming. Son, I'm not doing this for me, and I'm not doing this for the cameras. I'm doing it because I don't want anyone else to go through what I did, what we did. Malik opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, his phone buzzed again. The notification was from Twitter. Breaking. Inside sources reveal a confidential police department memo outlining pushback against James Walker's training program. Some officers refuse to comply. Sources cite discomfort with outside influence. The message was clear. The pushback had begun. Inside forces, people who didn't want to change, who liked things the way they were already plotting against him. Malik felt the pit in his stomach tighten. This wasn't just about a viral moment anymore. This was real. Someone's going to try to take this down, Malik said softly. James didn't answer right away. Then he exhaled, his shoulders tense. That's the price of making waves. But if we don't push for change, then who will? Later, that week by Friday, the fire that James had started was already spreading beyond the police force. Activists were speaking out. Politicians were making promises. And entire communities began to rally behind the Walker family's cause. But so were the critics, those who saw the training program as a threat to their power. The whispers of rebellion within the department began to grow louder. The police chief, the same one who had pushed for James's involvement, now found himself under intense pressure from higher-ups who wanted things to go back to the way they were. James could feel the storm brewing. He knew the time was coming when someone would take a swing, and it wasn't going to be pretty. But for now, they kept moving forward, one day at a time. And James kept teaching, Malik kept watching, and the world kept waiting. It started as a whisper, then a rumor, then a full-on storm. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an anonymous email slipping into James's inbox late one Friday night. The subject line was simple, but the content was anything but. I know what you're doing, and it's not going to last. At first, James dismissed it as one of the thousands of hate-filled messages circulating since the training program gained national attention. But then the details hit him like a punch to the gut. There were no names mentioned, but it described the layout of the training room, the officers who had been particularly vocal in support of the program, and, most disturbingly, detailed personal information about James and his family that only someone inside could have known. Malik, overhearing his father's muttered curses from the other room, stepped in. What is it? James didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked over at the computer screen, his brow furrowed. He knew this game. The signs of something darker were there. Someone close to him was turning on him. Dad? Malik asked. Again, this time louder. Finally, James spoke, his voice low. Someone's trying to tear this down from the inside. Malik's stomach dropped. Who? James leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him as he stared at the screen. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. The next day, Saturday morning, was cold, overcast. It mirrored the mood that had settled over James's training program. The office phone rang just as James was about to head out the door. He stared at the caller ID. Deputy Chief Brooks. He picked up, already knowing it wasn't going to be good news. "James," she started, her tone more guarded than usual. "We need to talk." "About what?" James asked, trying to keep his voice even. "About what's happening within the department. There are some concerns. Some of the officers who you've been working with, they're not happy with the direction things are going, and they're not keeping it quiet anymore." James's heart sank. He had suspected it, but hearing it, confirmed, made it feel like a punch to the gut. "Is it bad?" he asked, his voice low. "Worse than bad," she replied. "There are rumors of a plan to sabotage the program. A few officers have already reached out to internal affairs. And I'm hearing things about your involvement with the mayor's office." James's pulse quickened. He hadn't been in any talks with the mayor's office. Not directly, anyway. But he knew better than to take anything at face value. "Do you have names?" James asked, his voice hardening. Brooks hesitated. "Not yet, but I'll find out. Later." That day by afternoon, it was clear that the betrayal wasn't just a rumor. Someone had leaked internal documents from James's program to the press, spinning a narrative that his training program was not only ineffective, but a dangerous politicization of the police force. The news hit like a bomb. Walker's training. Program inside sources report political agenda. New training program puts cops at risk, claims anonymous officers. James stood in front of the television, feeling the weight of it all crash down on him. Malik was sitting across from him, his jaw clenched. "How the hell did this happen?" James muttered, his mind racing. "You told me to watch for the ones who didn't want change," Malik said, his voice quiet. "Looks like we found them." James clenched his fists. "Whoever's behind this, they're trying to break me. And they know exactly where to hit." The betrayal unfolds. By the time James arrived at the training center the following Monday, the mood had shifted. Officers who had once been on his side were now suspicious, their eyes downcast, avoiding contact. Others who had shown up eager to learn were now questioning the legitimacy of everything they had been taught. When he walked into the training room, one officer, Sergeant Lucas, stood up, his posture rigid. "We need to talk," Lucas said. James stood his ground, crossing his arms. "About what?" Lucas's eyes flicked to the other officers in the room who were now watching him. He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "About your program, and about what's going on behind the scenes." James's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I'm not the only one who's concerned, Walker," Lucas said, his voice tinged with something like pity. "There are whispers in the department. Some people say you're more about making headlines than real change, that you're pushing an agenda that's not about police work." James clenched his jaw. "And you believe that?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He just looked at James, then back at the other officers. "I'm just saying, you better watch your back. Not everyone in here is as loyal as you think." Before James could respond, Lucas turned and left the room, leaving behind a cold silence that sent a chill down his spine. Later that evening, Malik watched his father as they ate dinner. James had been quiet all evening, distracted by the weight of the situation. Malik wanted to say something, to reassure him, but the truth was he didn't know what to say. "I don't get it, Dad," Malik said finally. "Why would someone in your own department do this?" James looked up from his plate, his eyes tired but sharp. "Because change is hard, because I'm doing something they never wanted to do, and because they think I'm taking their power away." Malik nodded slowly. "So what do we do now?" James paused for a long moment before answering. "We keep going. We don't stop." He stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin, his face hardening with resolve. "They think they can stop me, but they don't know who they're messing with." 2 days later, the walls of the training facility felt like they were closing in. The whispers had grown louder, and James could feel the tension in every room he entered. The officers who had once been his allies now looked at him with distrust, as though he were a stranger. Even those who hadn't been involved in the sabotage seemed to question his motives, wondering if the price of reform was worth the cost. Malik sat in his car outside the training center, staring at his phone screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to send a message to Ava, but he didn't know what to say. The whole situation felt like it was spiraling out of control. What's going to happen now? He thought, frustration bubbling up inside him. His dad had fought so hard for change. Was it all going to fall apart? He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep pushing forward like this, especially with the internal forces working against them. Everyone seemed to be waiting for them to fail, and he wasn't sure they could stop it anymore. Inside the training facility, James stood in front of a whiteboard, his marker in hand. The lesson on de-escalation techniques had been planned for days, but it was clear that none of the officers were paying attention. Some were staring at their phones, others whispering to each other. The room was charged with tension. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Let's focus, people. We're here to learn. This training matters. But even as the words left his mouth, James felt the unease settle deeper. He couldn't ignore the growing divide in the room. He was trying to teach them something that could change the entire department, but all he saw were walls. Walls built on decades of distrust. Fear and broken systems, James. He turned to see Deputy Chief Brooks standing at the door, her face tight with concern. Can we talk? He nodded, excusing himself from the room. As he stepped into the hallway, he saw the strained look in her eyes. She wasn't here to offer support. What's going on? James asked, his voice low. Brooks took a deep breath, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. There's been a development. The situation's worse than I thought. James raised an eyebrow. Worse? How? Brooks's voice dropped even lower. Someone inside has been feeding information to the press. I don't know who yet, but it's someone close to you, James. Someone you trust. James felt his stomach tighten. Who? Brooks hesitated. It's Lucas. The name hit James like a punch to the gut. Lucas had been one of the first officers to fully embrace his program, a supporter from the beginning. How could he betray him now? Are you sure? James asked, trying to process the shock. I'm not entirely sure, Brooks replied, but the leaks are coming from his department. He's been passing information to reporters about the program's flaws. He's made it clear he wants to see it end. James could barely breathe. This was the last thing he needed right now. Not Lucas. Not after everything they'd been through, together. Why would he do this, James muttered, more to himself than to Brooks. I don't know, she said quietly. But we need to act fast before it gets worse. That night James couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Lucas's face flashed in his mind. He kept thinking about the early days, when Lucas had been one of the first officers to express interest in the training program, eager to make a difference. How could someone who had once stood by him turn on him so easily? Malik sat across from him at the kitchen table, staring at his phone as James paced back and forth. There was no easy way to process this. They had to do something. Stop the leaks, find out who was behind it, and protect the program. Dad, Malik said, his voice soft but firm, are we going to just let this happen? James stopped pacing and turned to face his son. What do you mean? I mean, we can't just sit back and let everything fall apart. People are already talking about the program like it's doomed. If Lucas is behind this, then we need to confront him. We can't keep pretending everything's fine. James let out a long, heavy sigh. He had been trying to keep his cool, to focus on the bigger picture. But the truth was, Malik was right. He couldn't afford to let this go on any longer. If Lucas was sabotaging everything from the inside, there was no telling how far this would go. You're right, James said after a long pause. We're not backing down. I'll confront Lucas tomorrow. The next day. The confrontation with Lucas came sooner than James expected. He found Lucas in a small office near the training facility, his back to the door. James didn't knock. He just walked. Lucas turned, startled by James's sudden appearance. His face hardened when he saw who it was. James, he said, his voice flat. What's going on? Cut the crap, Lucas, James said, his voice sharp. I know it's you. I know you've been leaking information to the press. Lucas's face went pale. What the hell are you talking about? Don't play dumb, James shot back. I know it's you. I know you've been feeding the media lies about the program. Lucas's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. James, you don't understand. I had to do it. It's bigger than you think. James clenched his fists. What are you talking about? You were supposed to be one of the good ones. You were supposed to help me. "Things aren't as simple as you think," Lucas said, his voice suddenly filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "I'm not the enemy here. You're playing a dangerous game. You have no idea what's coming for you. People like you. People who want to change things, they never last." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. "You're making a mistake, Lucas. This isn't about me. It's about what's right. And you—" James's voice faltered for a moment. "You've betrayed me. You've betrayed everything we've been working for." Lucas didn't respond. Instead, he just stood there, his gaze averted. James knew, in that moment, that things had changed forever. He had never imagined that someone so close to him could turn against him so easily. The system had a way of eating its own, and now it was clear that even the people who wanted change couldn't always be trusted. As James turned to leave, he felt a weight settle deep in his chest. This fight wasn't just about reform anymore. It was about survival. 2 days later, the weight of the betrayal had settled in. James could feel it in his bones. The sting of Lucas's words kept echoing in his mind, a reminder that he was fighting against a system far deeper and more entrenched than he had realized. His program was on the brink of collapse. The leaks, the media attacks, the whispers. In the halls, it all pointed to the same thing. The system was pushing back, but he refused to back down. "Dad, you can't keep going like this," Malik said, his voice laced with concern. "It's one thing to fight for change, but everything's falling apart. You're pushing yourself too hard." James didn't respond immediately. He stared out the window, watching the clouds roll in, dark and ominous, as if reflecting the storm inside him. Every part of his body told him to walk away, to cut his losses and let the program die before it took him down with it. But something inside refused to let go. "I've come too far to stop now," James finally said, his voice steady but tired. "This is bigger than me, Malik. If I don't push through, then I've just proven them right. I've got to finish what I started." Malik looked at him, frustration mixing with concern. "But at what cost, Dad? You're not just putting yourself at risk, you're putting all of us in danger. We can't let them destroy everything." James clenched his jaw. He knew Malik was right. Every move he made felt like it was pulling them closer to the edge. But to stop now, to walk away, it felt like betraying everything he'd worked for. "We're not walking away," James said firmly, his eyes darkening with determination. "I'm not going to let them win. Not this time." The next morning, James walked into the training facility with a sense of urgency, his every step echoing in the empty hallways. The program had been in chaos for days now, with officers more divided than ever. The rumors were circulating faster than he could address them, and the press had made it clear they were ready to strike again at any weakness. The training room, once filled with eager faces, now felt like a battlefield. The officers who had supported him were growing quieter, their faces tight with uncertainty. Those who had once looked up to him as a mentor now saw him as a symbol of division, a lightning rod for all the frustrations they had kept hidden for years. As James walked into the room, Sergeant Lucas wasn't there. He hadn't been for days. Lucas had distanced himself from the program completely, and now James wondered if he'd made a mistake in trusting him so fully. The officers who were present barely made eye contact with him. There was no warmth, no camaraderie, just cold stares, some laced with resentment. James cleared his throat. "Let's get to work," he said, his voice firm. The tension in the room was palpable. No one moved at first. They all just stood there, uncertain of what to do. He had become the enemy, the person who had pushed too far too fast. He had promised change, but the reality of that change was too much for them to handle. "I said let's get to work," James repeated, his voice sharp this time. A few officers began to shift, reluctantly taking their positions. But the energy was different now. There was no passion in their movements. They were just going through the motions, not engaged, not invested. It was like he was talking to ghosts. Later that day, James's phone buzzed on his desk, interrupting his thoughts. It was an unfamiliar number, he answered, his mind racing with possibilities. "This is James, Mr. Walker," a voice on the other end said, cool and collected. "I think we need to talk." James frowned, a cold shiver running down his spine. "Who is this?" It doesn't matter who I am, the voice continued, but what matters is what's happening to your program. We both know it's not going to survive much longer. You're out of your depth and you've made too many enemies. You're not going to win this fight. You can't go up against the whole department. Not when they've already made up their minds. James's blood ran cold. Who's behind this? He demanded. There's no one person, the voice said cryptically. It's the system. Walker, it's the way things work, and you can't change that. James clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had known this fight wasn't going to be easy, but he hadn't expected it to be so relentless. He hadn't realized just how many people were invested in keeping things the way they were. What do you want from me? James asked, his voice low. I want you to understand that this isn't just your fight. You're not the hero you think you are. You're a pawn in a game much bigger than you. Before James could respond, the line went dead. That night, Malik sat on the couch, his eyes scanning the latest news updates. The articles about the training program were getting more personal now, and the backlash was growing stronger. His father's name was becoming synonymous with failure, and every time he saw his dad try to push through it, Malik could feel the weight of the burden on his shoulders. He knew that his dad was trying to do the right thing, but the world wasn't making it easy. How much longer can we keep going like this? Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James sat beside him, his eyes tired but resolute. As long as it takes. Malik sighed, the exhaustion in his eyes matching his father's. But what if it's too much? What if we can't fix it? James looked at him, his expression hardening with the weight of years spent fighting for justice. If we give up now, Malik, we've lost. And I'm not losing. Not this time. We're going to fight until the end, whatever that end is. The next day, James called a meeting with Deputy Chief Brooks. He needed to know where things stood. They were running out of time, and the internal sabotage was more than he could handle on his own. As they sat down in her office, James noticed the tiredness in her eyes. She wasn't just fighting for the program anymore. She was fighting for her own career, her own place in the system that was quickly shifting beneath her. We need to act, James said, his voice firm. If Lucas and whoever else is behind this wants to shut this program down, we need to stop them before it's too late. Brooks nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. But we're running out of options. The media's on their side now. If we don't act soon, the public perception will kill this program for good. James's mind raced as he formulated a plan. He needed to expose the people working behind the scenes to take him down. He needed to strike hard and fast before the storm completely consumed everything. We go public, James said, determination in his voice. We put everything out there. We don't wait for them to take the first shot. We take the fight. To them, Brooks hesitated. It's risky, but maybe it's the only way. 2 days later, the weight of their decision to go public hung over James like a dark cloud. There was no turning back now. The media had already begun to circulate rumors of internal sabotage, but now James and Malik were taking control of the narrative. They would expose the rot from the inside out, even if it meant risking their careers, their futures, and everything they had worked so hard to build. James sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. His hands were trembling as he scrolled through social media, reading the growing pile of criticism and hatred directed at him and the program. Every post felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of how much was at stake. "Dad, you okay?" Malik's voice broke through his thoughts, his concern evident as he entered the room. James looked up, his face tight with resolve. "I'm not." "Sure, but I have to do this. We don't have a choice." Malik sat down beside him, his eyes filled with doubt. What if it blows up in our faces? What if the public turns on us even harder? James shook his head, his gaze hardening. "We can't keep hiding from the truth, Malik. We've come this far. I'm not backing down now." That afternoon, James and Malik stood outside the courthouse, preparing for a press conference that would change everything. The media had already gathered, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. There was no turning back now. This was the moment they would expose the lies, the betrayal and the corruption within the police department. James adjusted his tie, his throat dry. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his program anymore. He was fighting for his reputation, for his family, and for the future of the department. Malik stood beside him, looking both anxious and determined. He was holding a folder filled with evidence, documents, recordings, and messages that would reveal the truth about the sabotage from within. "We're going to do this," James said, more to himself than to Malik. "We're going to show them that we won't be silenced." The press conference. The crowd of reporters parted as James and Malik walked up to the podium, their faces resolute. James stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The questions began immediately, but he was ready. "Mr. Walker, can you explain why the program is failing?" one reporter asked, her voice sharp with skepticism. "Mr. Walker, what do you have to say about the leaks and media attacks? Are you responsible for these issues?" Another reporter pressed. James raised his hand, silencing the crowd. His voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of the truth. "First of all," he began, "let me be clear. The issues we're facing aren't a result of this program's failure. They are a result of internal sabotage and a system that is determined to keep things the way they are. For years we've been trying to change a broken system, but change is never easy, and it certainly isn't welcomed by everyone." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd of reporters, then he turned to Malik. Malik stepped forward, holding up the folder of evidence. The reporters leaned forward, eager for the truth. "Inside this folder," Malik said, his voice calm but unwavering, "you'll find proof of leaks, sabotage, and an attempt to discredit everything my father has worked for. We have the names of those responsible, and the documents that show they've been undermining the program from the inside. We won't stand by while they destroy everything we've built." The room went silent for a moment, the tension thick. The reporters were stunned, unsure of how to react. James could feel the shift in the air. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or come together. One reporter spoke up, voice shaking. "But Mr. Walker, how do you justify the fact that these leaks are coming from within your own department? Doesn't this mean you failed as a leader?" James took a deep breath. "I didn't fail, the system failed. The officers who've been sabotaging this program are a part of the very system we're trying to reform. And it's not just about me. It's about every officer who wants to see change, every officer who believes in justice. We are the ones who are being targeted because we dared to challenge the status quo." Later that evening, as the press conference ended, the aftermath hit like a wave. The news was everywhere. Social media exploded with reactions, both positive and negative. Some praised James for his courage and transparency, while others saw it as an admission of guilt, a last-ditch effort to save face. In the midst of the media storm, James and Malik retreated to their car. The day had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and James could feel the toll it had taken on both of them. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," Malik said quietly, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Everywhere we go, there's someone telling us we're wrong." James stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "It's not going to be easy, son, but it's the only way. We have to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard it gets." Malik nodded, but James could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew his son was scared, and truthfully, so was he. But James couldn't afford to show it. The next day. The fallout from the press conference continued to spread. News outlets were analyzing every word, every gesture, trying to decipher whether James had exposed the truth or was simply deflecting blame. But James wasn't concerned with the media's interpretation. He had one goal: to make sure the truth came to light. He sat in his office, poring over the evidence Malik had presented at the press conference. There were more names on the list, more people involved in the sabotage than he had initially realized. It wasn't just a few bad apples, it was a coordinated effort to tear down everything he had worked for. The door to his office creaked open, and Deputy Chief Brooks walked in. She looked worn, as though the weight of the past few days had finally caught up with her. "James," she said, her voice tired but resolute, "we need to talk." He gestured to the chair across from him. "What's on your mind?" "We're in the middle of a war, James," she said, sitting down. "And it's not just with the officers. The public's perception is shifting. We need to figure out how to move forward before it all falls apart." James met her gaze, his eyes steely with determination. "I'm not backing down, Brooks. "This fight is far from over," she nodded. "I know, but the question is, where do we go from here?" James stared out the window, the weight of his decision sinking in. "We keep pushing forward. We take this to the next level. We make them see that we're not going to stop until things change." 3 days later, the world was beginning to close in on James. The fight he had started, the battle for reform, the push to change the system, was no longer just a personal mission. It had become a war. And every war has its casualties. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls he couldn't answer. News outlets were calling. Family and friends were reaching out, all asking the same question: what's next? But James didn't have an answer. Not anymore. "Dad, we need to talk," Malik said, entering the living room. His voice had an edge to it that James hadn't heard before. There was a heaviness in his son's eyes, a tiredness that mirrored his own. James looked up from the pile of paperwork on the table in front of him. He hadn't slept in days, not since the press conference. The media storm had only gotten worse, with every day bringing more accusations, more leaks, more attacks. "What is it, Malik?" James said, his voice rough. He knew that this moment had been coming, the moment when they would have to face the true cost of what they were fighting for. "It's not just the department anymore," Malik began, pacing the room. "Here it's the whole city. People are angry. They're turning against you, against us. You're pushing too hard, and it's like nobody cares about what you're doing anymore. They just want you to fall." James rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at his body. He hadn't wanted Malik to see this side of the fight, but there was no escaping it now. "I know," James said quietly. "I know it's hard. But I can't stop now, son. If I back down, everything I've fought for will be for nothing. I promised those officers, I promised myself. I can't just walk away." Malik stopped pacing and looked at his father. There was an undeniable pain in his eyes, but also something else. Fear. "You're not seeing it, Dad. You're so focused on winning, but we're losing everything. The program, the department, our family." Malik's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not sure how much longer we can keep doing this." James felt his heart twist. He had known this was a possibility, that the toll this fight would take on them would be immense. But hearing it from Malik, hearing the anguish in his son's voice, made it all feel real. "I don't know what else to do, Malik," James whispered, his voice breaking. "I've put everything into this. I can't just let it fall apart." Malik shook his head, frustration boiling over. "You're not seeing the bigger picture, Dad. If you keep going like this, you're going to lose us too. You'll lose everything. And for what?" James opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He wanted to say that he was doing this for them, for a better future. But the truth was, he didn't know if he was still doing it for the right reasons anymore. Maybe he had crossed a line. "I'm sorry," Malik said, his voice softer now. "But I don't want to lose you too." James's chest tightened as he looked at his son. The weight of the world was on him, but in this moment he saw the toll it had taken on Malik. His son wasn't just worried about the program or the department. He was worried about his family, about their future together. "Malik," James's voice trailed off. What could he say? He had promised to make things better, but now he wasn't sure if he was making anything better. "I don't want to lose you either. I don't." The next day, the phone rang again. James didn't recognize the number, but he picked up anyway. His heart sank when he heard the voice on the other end. "Mr. Walker," Deputy Chief Brooks's voice was tense. "We need to talk. Now." James's stomach churned. "What's going on, Brooks?" "There's a new development," she said. "I don't know how to say this, but the board is moving to fire you. It's not just the leaks anymore. They're accusing you of undermining the department's integrity. And with the media pressure, there's nothing I can do to stop it." James stood up, the room suddenly spinning. The breaking point had arrived. The system wasn't just attacking him anymore. It was attacking everything he had built, everything he had stood for. "I can't let them do this," James said, his voice low and steady despite the panic rising inside him. "I don't think you understand," Brooks continued. "This isn't just about you anymore, James. They've already made up their minds. And no matter what you do, this is over." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He felt numb, as though his body had stopped reacting. This was the moment he had feared, the moment when the fight was no longer in his control. "I won't." "Go down without a fight," James said, his voice hardening. "You can tell them that." Brooks didn't respond right away. There was a long pause, then she said, "I don't know if you can win this fight, James, but I'll do what I can to support you." Later that day, James sat in his office, the weight of everything crashing down on him. The media storm had reached its peak, with reporters gathering outside his department demanding answers. Inside, the pressure was mounting from every side. Colleagues who had once supported him were now distancing themselves, and the board was on the verge of firing him, and through it all Malik stood by his side. "What happens now?" Malik asked quietly, sitting across from his father. His eyes were tired, but he refused to back down. He wasn't going to give up on his dad. Not. Yet James looked at him, exhaustion and frustration clouding his expression. "I don't know. I'm fighting for something bigger than just this job, Malik. But right now it feels like I'm fighting a losing battle." Malik leaned forward. "Then why keep fighting, Dad, if it's going to cost you everything?" "Why keep going?" James met his son's gaze, a heaviness in his chest. "Because if I walk away now, I'll lose more than just this job. I'll lose the chance to change things, and I can't let that happen." That evening as night fell, James sat alone in his office, staring out the window at the city below. The weight of his choices, the sacrifices, the battles fought, it all felt like too much. But there was something inside him, something that refused to let go, that refused to surrender. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Brooks. "They're pushing forward with the vote." "It's over, James, I'm sorry." James let out a long, shaky breath. It was over. The battle had been lost, but the war was still going. The next morning, James had always known that fighting the system wouldn't be easy, but he never imagined it would come to this. Sitting in his office, the walls felt like they were closing in on him. The phone calls had stopped coming. His inbox was silent. The media was no longer interested in his cause. They were interested in his downfall. Every headline screamed failure. "James," Malik said, walking into the office, his expression grim, "we need to talk." James didn't look up from his desk. He could feel Malik's presence, but at that moment he didn't have the energy to face the reality they were both trying to avoid. "I know," James replied softly, his voice strained. "It's over." Malik took a deep breath, sitting down beside him. "Dad, you can't just give up. You fought this hard." James raised a hand, silencing his son. "I'm not giving up, Malik. The system beat me. They're pushing me out, and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm losing everything." Malik stared at his father, the hurt evident in his eyes. "But this wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to change everything." "I thought I could," James said, his voice cracking. "But I was wrong. I should have seen it earlier. The system doesn't change because of one person. It's too big, too corrupt. And now I've dragged you and your mother into this mess." Malik stood up, pacing the small office. "Dad, no, this isn't just about you. This is about all of us. This is about what's right. We can still fix this. We just need a plan." James's heart sank. Malik was still holding on to hope, still, believing that they could turn things around. But James knew the truth. His time was up. Later that day, the announcement came in the afternoon. The board had voted, and James was officially suspended from his position. The city was in turmoil as the news broke. His colleagues, who had once been his supporters, were now distancing themselves. The media outlets, who had once praised his efforts, were now calling him a fraud, a failure. James watched the news unfold on the screen in his office. The reporters were relentless, painting him as a man who had tried and failed. The word failure echoed in his mind louder than any other thought. Malik watched the broadcast beside him, his hands clenched into fists. "This isn't right, Dad. This isn't who you are." James shook his head, unable to find the words to reassure his son. "It doesn't matter, Malik. It's over. No one cares about the truth anymore. They only care about who's winning." That evening, James sat alone in his apartment, staring at the blank television screen. The silence was deafening, and every thought in his mind felt like a heavy burden. He had put everything into this fight, the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the pain. And for what? To lose everything in the end? His phone buzzed again. It was a text from Deputy Chief Brooks. "I'm sorry, James. I tried to warn you. I hope you can find peace." James read the message twice, his chest tightening with frustration and regret. Peace. What did that even mean anymore? How could he find peace when everything he had worked for had been torn down? A knock at the door. The knock on the door was unexpected. James didn't want to face anyone, didn't want to deal with the world anymore, but when he opened the door, it wasn't who he expected. "Brooks?" James asked, surprised. The deputy chief was standing in front of him, her eyes tired but resolute. "I couldn't just let you sit here alone," she said softly, stepping inside. James shook his head, too tired to argue. "I've lost everything, Brooks. My career, my family, my dignity." "You haven't lost your dignity," Brooks replied firmly. "You may have lost your job, but that doesn't change who you are." James looked at her, disbelief in his eyes. "How can you say that? You know what they're calling me, what the city is calling me." "I know," she said quietly. "But you did something most people wouldn't do. You tried to change the system. Not everyone is brave enough to fight the way you did. Even if it didn't work out, it doesn't make you a failure." James's shoulders slumped, the weight of the conversation too much to bear. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Brooks. It's all falling apart." Brooks stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this. You've got people who believe in you, James. And sometimes it's not about winning. It's about making the effort, about showing that you're willing to fight for something better." James let out a long sigh. "I don't know if I can keep going." Brooks nodded, understanding the depth of his pain. "You don't have to decide now. But just remember, this isn't the end, it's just a setback." The next morning, the fallout from the suspension continued. James's name was everywhere. The media had latched onto the story like sharks to blood in the water. Some reports focused on his downfall, while others questioned the fairness of the board's decision. But the damage had been done. His reputation was in ruins, and his dream of reforming the system had been shattered. As he walked through the department the following morning, he could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. Some looked away in shame, while others muttered under their breath. It was as if he had become a ghost in his own world. Malik was waiting for him outside his office when he returned. The look on his son's face was a mixture of worry and confusion. "I don't understand," Malik said, his voice shaking. "Why are they doing this, Dad? Why are they tearing you apart?" James paused, looking at his son. He wished he had an answer, wished he could tell Malik that it would all be okay. But he knew the truth. "Because I didn't play the game the way they wanted me to," James said quietly. "I tried to change things, Malik, but the system doesn't want to change. And now it's over." That night James sat alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed again, but he didn't answer it. The silence in his apartment was deafening. Everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, seemed like a distant memory. All that remained were the shattered pieces of his fight for reform, and the question of whether it had all been worth it. His phone buzzed once more, a text from Malik. "Dad, we'll figure this out. We'll find a way." For the first time in days, a faint spark of hope flickered inside James. Maybe it wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fighting for. A week later, the weeks after the suspension were a blur. The headlines had started to die down, replaced by new stories and scandals, but the damage to James's career remained. He still didn't know what came next. He hadn't even been able to return home to his family. His wife, Carla, was busy with her own struggles, as they both navigated this new, uncertain reality. Malik hadn't been the same either. He seemed distant, withdrawn, no longer the hopeful son who had stood by his father's side. The fight had taken its toll on both of them, and James knew he had to do something to regain their trust, their belief in the future. His phone buzzed again, and for the first time in days he glanced at the screen. It was a message from Brooks. "Meet me at the old precinct. I think we have a chance. Don't give up yet." James read the message twice, his heart skipping a beat. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him hope. He wasn't sure if this was another false lead or a lifeline, but he knew one thing for certain. He had nothing left to lose. At the old precinct, the Air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and dusty file cabinets when James arrived. The old precinct had long been abandoned, the windows covered in grime and the floors creaking beneath his feet. Yet in this dilapidated building, James could feel something stirring, a sense of urgency, of change, that he hadn't felt in weeks. Brooks was waiting for him in one of the back rooms. Her expression was grim, but her eyes were filled with something else: determination. "I didn't want to bring you here, but I think we're out of options," she said, motioning for him to sit down. "This place holds secrets, James, things that could help us turn this around." James raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. "What do you mean? This is just an old building. What could possibly be left here that could change anything?" Brooks slid a manila folder across the table. "You've been fighting the wrong battle. You've been trying to fight the system from the inside, but that's never going to work, not the way you've been doing it." James frowned, glancing down at the folder. "What's in here?" "The truth," Brooks said, her voice lowering. "The corruption in this department runs deeper than you ever imagined. But I've got the proof, James. If we go public with this, we can bring the whole system down. We can expose them for what they really are." James opened the folder, his hands shaking. Inside were documents, emails, and confidential memos, each piece of evidence pointing to something darker, more sinister than he had ever thought possible. It wasn't just about bad apples in the department. This was systemic. There were high-ranking officers involved in illegal activity, money laundering, bribery, the works. This, James said, his voice faltering. "This could take them all down." Brooks nodded. "Exactly. And you're the one who has the platform to make this public. You've already taken the fall for things you didn't do. Now it's time to take them down." James felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. This could be the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he could truly make a difference. But it also felt like walking a razor's edge. Exposing this corruption could cost him everything again. Could he risk it? "This could destroy everything," James said, his voice low. "I've already lost my job, my career is over, and if we do this, it could destroy the city, destroy everything I've worked for." "I don't think you understand, James," Brooks said, her voice hardening. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about what's right. The city, the people, they deserve to know the truth, and you're the one who can make it happen." James's mind raced. The decision weighed heavily on him. But as he looked at the evidence in front of him, he knew what he had to do. The cost was high, but it always had been. And if he didn't act now, the corruption would only grow unchecked and unstoppable. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made the decision. The next day, James stood before a crowd of reporters. His face was solemn, but inside, his heart raced with anticipation. He had already prepared himself for the worst: public backlash, loss of credibility, even the risk of legal action. But this time he wasn't going down without a fight. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "I've been accused of many things over the past few weeks," James began. "I've been called a failure, a fraud, and I've lost everything: my career, my reputation, and nearly my family. But what I'm about to tell you today isn't about me. This is about something far bigger." He paused, scanning the sea of reporters in front of him. They were listening now, their pens poised and cameras focused. "What I've discovered over the course of my time with the department is something no one wants to admit. There are corrupt officers in this department, high-ranking individuals involved in criminal activities that affect every citizen in this city. And I'm not here to hide it anymore. I'm here to expose the truth." The room went silent. It was as if the entire world had paused to hear him speak. James could feel the weight of his words, and the realization that this would either make or break him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for redemption," he continued. "But I'm asking for a chance to do what's right. This department needs to be held accountable. The truth needs to come to light. And if that means taking down everyone involved, then I'll do it, no matter the cost." Later that evening, as James watched the news coverage, he saw his face plastered across the screen. The headlines were explosive. There were debates, outrage, and promises of investigations. The media was eating it up, but this time it wasn't a story about a man falling from grace. It was a story about a man who had risen to expose something greater than himself. James felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if his family would ever be the same. But he had done something. He had made a difference, and that was enough. The morning after James woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The light from the screen illuminated his dark room. He had barely slept, too consumed with thoughts of what had happened the night before. The press conference, the confession, the truth being laid bare for the world to see. He picked up the phone, heart sinking, as he glanced at the flood of messages from Malik, Carla, and a slew of unknown numbers. Malik. "Dad, are you okay? What's happening? You're on every channel. We need to talk." Carla. "James, what did you do? I'm getting calls from every reporter in town. The kids are seeing this. We need to talk, now." James's stomach churned as he ran a hand through his hair. He knew this was coming. This kind of attention was inevitable, but nothing could have prepared him for the magnitude of the storm. The city was on fire with reactions. Anger, disbelief, even support from some corners. He had exposed the rot within the department, but now he was standing in the middle of it, facing a reckoning he wasn't sure he was prepared for. Later, Mao. Day James sat in his living room, phone clutched tightly in his hand, as reporters continued to call. His office at the precinct was a ghost town now, empty, locked up tight. The seat of his power turned into an abandoned shell. The investigation into the corruption he had uncovered was underway, but the fallout had begun even before that. Brooks had been right. Exposing the truth was just the beginning. Now, James had to survive the fallout. He had put his trust in the PE system, and now the system was fighting back. Allies had turned into enemies, and enemies were circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. He glanced at the door when he heard a knock. It was too early for a friendly visitor. He had no friends left, but when he opened the door, he was surprised to see Carla standing there, her face a mix of concern and frustration. "James," she said softly, stepping inside. "What did you do?" James felt the weight of her words in his chest. "I did what I had to do, Carla. I couldn't let them get away with it." "I know, but this is too much. You've put all of us in danger." Carla's voice cracked as she gestured around the room. "The city is torn apart. You're not just exposing corruption anymore. You're part of the problem now." James closed his eyes, guilt gnawing at him. "I didn't want any of this. I wanted to make things better. I just thought I could change things." Carla shook her head, the tears in her eyes betraying the conflict she felt. "You didn't just change things, James. You shattered everything. Our family, your career, the city, it's all falling apart. And I don't know if we can put it back together." The silence between them hung heavy. Carla's words hit him harder than anything the media or the department could throw at him. His family was in turmoil, and all he could do was watch as it all unraveled. The investigation begins. The media frenzy didn't slow down. Investigators were dispatched immediately to follow up on the claims James had made, and every news outlet had their cameras trained on the precinct, waiting for the next bombshell. But while the world was watching, James wasn't sure if he was the hero or the villain in his own story. The city had divided. Some praised him for exposing the truth. Others blamed him for the chaos that had followed, and some believed it was all a personal vendetta against the very system he had once vowed to serve. As James watched the news reports, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Malik. "Dad," Malik said, his voice strained. "You've got to be careful. I'm hearing things. Some of the people you thought were on your side, Brooks included, they're starting to distance themselves from you." James sighed. "I know, I feel it too. People are turning on me, but I can't back down now." "You don't have to do this alone," Malik said, his voice filled with determination. "You've still got me. We'll figure this out together." James's heart swelled with pride, even as he felt the burden of the storm crashing down around him. He couldn't afford to give up, not when Malik was still holding on. A meeting with the enemy. It wasn't long before the opposition made their move. James received an unexpected invitation to meet with a group of high-ranking officials from the department, people he had once called allies, now circling like sharks. The meeting was set for a dimly lit conference room in a downtown hotel. As James arrived, he was greeted by Deputy Chief Thomas and a few others who had been involved in the internal investigations. They weren't there to discuss the corruption they were all complicit in. They were there to save face. And they had no intention of letting James win. "I assume you know why we're here, James," Thomas said, his tone cold. James took a seat, trying to keep his composure. He had seen these men and women at their best and at their worst, but today there was nothing but hostility in the air. "You want me to back down," James said. "You want me to retract my statement and pretend none of this ever happened." "We're offering you a deal," Thomas replied, his voice low. "You retract your accusations, and we'll make sure the investigation into you doesn't go any further. We'll keep this out of the press, and you can walk away with some dignity. You can go back to your family and leave the rest of us to clean up the mess you made." James's blood boiled. "You think I'll just turn my back on Nye? What's right? On everything I've worked for?" Thomas's smile was thin, his eyes calculating. "It's not about what's right, James. It's about what's smart. You're out of options. This is your only chance to leave with your head held high." James stood up, his voice steady, despite the storm raging inside him. "You're wrong. I'm not walking away. I won't be intimidated by threats or lies. I'm going to see this through, no matter the cost." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room. The deal had been clear: compromise or be destroyed. But James wasn't interested in playing their game. Later that night, as James returned home that evening, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The fight was far from over, but he wasn't sure how much more he could endure. Carla was waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed. "So, what happened?" "We're not done yet," James said, his voice resolute. "They offered me a deal to retract everything, but I turned it down. I'm not backing down." Carla stared at him, a mixture of admiration and concern in her eyes. "I don't know if you're being brave or foolish, James, but I know this. Whatever happens, next we'll face it together." James nodded. "I won't let them win, Carla, no matter what it costs." The days following the meeting, the city was buzzing with anger, confusion, and disbelief after James's public exposure of the department's corruption. His phone rang off the hook, his inbox flooded with messages. Yet, despite the chaos, James felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He had made his choice, and now there was no going back. Carla was still uncertain. She didn't understand why James had chosen to go public with such a dangerous revelation. But for him, it was simple. It was the right thing to do, even if it cost him everything. Even if it meant sacrificing the one thing he had worked for his whole life, the trust of his family. But then something unexpected happened. The city began to change its tune. A new ally appears. It was late in the afternoon when James received a call from someone he hadn't expected to hear from. A reporter named Delilah Hughes, an investigative journalist who had gained a reputation for uncovering corruption in the police force years before. She had been following James's story closely, and despite the risks, she had an offer he couldn't ignore. "I'm not calling to ask for an interview," Lila said, her voice calm but urgent. "I'm calling because I believe you're right, and I think we can help each other." James sat up straight, surprised. "Help each other? How?" Lila's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "I've been digging for months, James. I've got sources, information, stuff that can bring the whole system down, but I can't do it alone, and neither can you." James's mind raced. "What are you talking about?" "Those documents you exposed. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper we dig, the more we find, but we need to be careful. People are watching us. And some of the people in your corner, like Brooks, are already starting to pull away. But if we stick together, we can shine a light on the truth and make sure it doesn't get buried." James felt a flicker of hope. Lila had always been on the fringes of the investigation, her work often dismissed as too radical by the mainstream media. But this wasn't just about sensationalism. It was about truth. Real truth. "I'm in," James said, his voice firm. "What do we do next?" Lila's response was quick, her tone filled with conviction. "Meet me tomorrow, we'll go over everything, but be careful. You've made enemies, James, powerful ones." The investigation intensifies. The next day, James met Lila in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. The place was quiet, the kind of spot where no one would expect anything significant to happen. It was exactly the kind of location James needed, safe, discreet. Lila arrived first, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. She was dressed simply, dark jeans, a leather jacket, and a pair of sunglasses perched on her head. She was younger than James had expected, but there was a fierce determination in her gaze that immediately put him at ease. "Here's what we have so far," Lila said, sliding a folder across the table to him. "It's all connected, James. The corruption, the money laundering, even the drug trade that's been circulating within certain precincts. But this goes all the way to the top. And I mean top, James, the mayor's office, the state government. It's bigger than you think." James flipped through the folder, his heart racing with every page. It was worse than he had imagined. The documents were damning. Not just minor corrupt activities, but a full-blown network of illegal operations. And at the heart of it all, officials at the highest levels of power. I knew it went deep, but... James trailed off, his thoughts spinning. This is insane. How do we even begin to go public with something like this? Lila leaned in, her voice low. "We're not going public yet. We need the rest of the evidence, James. We need to make sure we've got everything before we make any moves. The higher-ups will do anything to protect themselves. If we expose this too soon, they'll bury us and bury the story before it gets any traction." "But we're already on the edge of a cliff," James said. "What happens if they find out what we're doing?" Lila's expression softened. "We fight, and we make sure we're ready for the fallout. If we do this right, we can change everything. But it's not going to be easy." James nodded, a new sense of purpose filling him. For the first time since he'd blown the whistle, he felt like he wasn't alone. He had someone who understood, someone who was willing to take the risks with him. The enemy strikes back. Meanwhile, the department wasn't just going to sit idly by and let this slide. Deputy Chief Thomas and the others had been silent, but James could feel their presence lurking in the background. He knew they were scheming. They wouldn't let this go without a fight. The first strike came that evening when James's lawyer called him with unsettling news. "They've got a warrant," the lawyer said, sounding tense. "They're raiding your house, James. The department's making their move. They want to find something, anything to use against you." James's stomach churned. He had expected retaliation, but this felt different. They were desperate now. This wasn't just about silencing him, it was about sending a message. "We need to move quickly," the lawyer continued. "Get to a safe place. If they find what they're looking for, they'll use it to discredit everything you've said. They'll make you look like a liar. You can't let them catch you off guard." James didn't need to hear more. He slammed down the phone and grabbed his things, rushing out the door. The escape James's heart pounded as he sped through the streets, his mind racing. The police were coming. The investigation was picking up steam, and now they were going to use any excuse to take him down. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his closest allies. Lila's face flashed in his mind. If she was right, the people who had once been his friends, Brooks, Thomas, others, were already turning against him. This was no longer just about a scandal. It was a full-blown war. As James drove through the night, he thought about his family. Carla, Malik. He didn't know what was next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to give up, not now. The reckoning continues. As the night wore on, James found refuge at a safe house Lila had arranged for him. It wasn't much, just a small apartment on the edge of town, but it was safe for now. He sat by the window staring out at the city. He had exposed the truth, but now he was paying the price. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with more danger than he had ever imagined. But there was no turning back. The investigation would continue. The tide had started to turn. The pressure mounts. The days following the raid were a blur. James had gone into hiding, bouncing from one safe house to the next, constantly on the move. The investigation was relentless, and the pressure from both. The department and his own conscience seemed to close in on him from all sides. His phone calls were monitored. His every move was being tracked. Even though Lila had promised to help him stay under the radar, he knew the walls were closing in. He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even the people he once considered allies. The story had exploded. News outlets were covering every angle of the corruption he had exposed, but they were also reporting on his disappearance, questioning his motivations. Was he a hero? A whistleblower? Or was he simply someone who had bitten off more than he could chew? James couldn't ignore the mounting tension in the air. People were starting to talk. His family, especially Malik, was worried. And he had heard rumors that Carla was considering going to the police herself to try to protect the kids. The damage was spreading beyond his own life. It was affecting everyone around him. A tense reunion with Lila had arranged another meeting, one that James felt both anxious and desperate for. They were meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place known only to those who were in the know. It was a place where they could talk freely, away from the eyes of the authorities. When James arrived, Lila was already there, pacing back and forth with an anxious look on her face. She was as relentless as ever, but there was a new weariness in her eyes that James hadn't noticed before. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You look like hell," James said, stepping inside. Lila didn't smile. "You're not looking so hot yourself." She motioned for him to sit. "We need to talk. Things are escalating faster than I thought." "I know," James replied, sitting down. "They're coming for me. I can feel it. I haven't been able to go outside without feeling like I'm being watched." Lila exhaled sharply. "It's worse than we thought. I've managed to dig up more information. The network of corruption is deeper than just the department. There's a whole syndicate operating right under our noses. Drug trafficking, money, laundering, political connections. It's massive." James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "So what does that mean? Are we getting close to uncovering the key players?" Lila hesitated. "Not just yet, but we're getting closer. I've made contact with some people who are willing to help us." "But you need to be prepared, James. These people are dangerous. They've already killed before to protect their interests." James's stomach churned. "And if we expose them, what happens?" Lila's face hardened. "We're going to need every ounce of evidence we can get. If we don't have it, they'll bury us. They'll make sure we're silenced. I don't know how much longer we can stay one step ahead of them." Breaking point. The conversation left James uneasy. But it was the reality he had to face. He had walked into this fight with his eyes wide open, but now he was starting to see the full scope of what he had gotten himself into. When he left the warehouse, the weight of the information was heavy on his shoulders. He had to keep moving. Keep searching for more, but at what cost? He couldn't even be sure who he could trust anymore. Back at his temporary hideout, James tried to get some rest, but his mind raced. The tension in the city was palpable. There was no safe place for him now. If the department wasn't after him, then the criminals behind the syndicate would be. Both sides were closing in, and James felt like he was running out of time. The days blurred together in a haze of fear and adrenaline. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break, that something was on the verge of unraveling. Family matters. Meanwhile, at home, the situation was growing dire. Carla was doing everything she could to keep the family safe, but the uncertainty was taking its toll. The kids were asking questions. Malik, ever the protector, was becoming more agitated with every passing day. It was a quiet afternoon when James got a call from Carla. Her voice was trembling, something he'd never heard before. "James, I can't keep doing this," she said, barely holding it together. "The kids are scared. They're asking why you're not coming home, and the media, they won't leave us alone. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." James's heart sank. He had known this would happen, but hearing Carla's voice crack with fear made it all feel real. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was their fight too. "I know, Carla, I know. I didn't want this to happen, but I'm trying to make things right. This is the only way. I'm doing this for all of us, even if it doesn't seem that way." Carla's voice was quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can wait any longer, James. You're putting us all at risk. I need you to think about what's best for the family." James paused. The pain in her voice hit him hard. He couldn't deny it. The cost of this fight was more than he had ever imagined. He had thought that exposing the truth would bring change, But all it had done was put everything he cared about in jeopardy. "I'm not giving up, Carla," he said softly. "I swear I'm not. I will fix this." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it anymore. The walls close. In the next morning, James got another unsettling call. This time, it was from his lawyer. "They've found something," the lawyer said, his voice strained. "It's big, and it's going to hit you hard." James's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "They've got a warrant for your arrest. They're charging you with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and a whole list of other things. They're going to try to make it look like you're the one who's been breaking the law this whole time." James gripped the phone tighter, a surge of anger rising within him. "What the hell are they talking about?" "I don't know yet," the lawyer replied. "But you need to get out of town now. They're coming for you." As James hung up, the walls seemed to close in even tighter. His life was falling apart, piece by piece. They were framing him for the very crimes he had tried to expose. He had one choice left: run or fight back with everything he had. A choice to make. James didn't sleep that night. The world outside seemed to have gone still, but his mind was anything but calm. The call from his lawyer had been the final blow. The arrest warrant was in motion, and the charges against him were as serious as they came. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit a crime, and a litany of other accusations that threatened to destroy his life. He had two choices: run or stay and fight. Running seemed like the logical choice: lay low, disappear, and hope that in time everything would blow over. But that wasn't who James was. He had already made his decision. He wasn't going to let the system bury the truth, no matter the cost. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't in this alone anymore. There were people who had stood by him, even when it seemed impossible. And then there were others, people he thought he could trust, who might not have his back when things got rough. A visit from an old friend. The next morning, as James was planning his next move, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Brooks, his old partner at the department, the one person James had always trusted, or so he thought. "Meet me at the old diner on 3rd and Main. We need to talk." The message made James uneasy. He hadn't heard from Brooks in days, not since the public fallout began. There had been no contact, no check-in, no reassurance. But now, out of the blue, Brooks was asking to meet. Something didn't sit right with him. But he couldn't afford to turn down any chance of getting more information. He needed to know where Brooks stood in all of this. The diner. The diner was quiet, as usual. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air, a sharp contrast to the tension James felt. He walked in slowly, scanning the room for Brooks. There, in a booth in the back, sat his former partner, looking out of place. Brooks hadn't changed much, still wearing his usual grey jacket, but his eyes were guarded, nervous even. James slid into the booth across from him. "You wanted to talk?" Brooks didn't meet his gaze at first. He stared down at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of him, swirling it absent-mindedly. "James, I've been following the news," Brooks said after a long pause. "This situation it's bigger than we thought." James's heart raced. He could feel it, the tension hanging between them. "Yeah, I know," he replied, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "I've uncovered something huge, but I need people to back me up. I need the truth to come out, Brooks." Brooks shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. He lowered his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about this, about you, and what you're doing." James leaned forward, searching Brooks's face. "What do you mean?" "James, listen to me," Brooks said, his voice growing strained. "This thing you've started, it's not just dangerous, it's going to ruin your life. People like you, people who try to expose the truth, they don't walk away from this unscathed. Trust me, I've seen it before." James's chest tightened. "So what are you saying? You're backing out, after everything we've been through?" Brooks hesitated for a moment, then finally met James's eyes. "No, James, I'm not backing out, but I can't risk everything. There's too much at stake. I've already put my career on the line just by talking to you about this. I can't do more." James stared at him, disbelief washing over him. "What the hell are you saying, Brooks? Are you telling me you're just going to sit by while the whole damn system rots?" Brooks didn't respond immediately. His silence said everything. And that's when James realized the truth. Brooks wasn't on his side anymore. He was scared. But worse, he was already working with the other side. He was trying to protect his own skin, not James's. The betrayal. James stood up, his hands shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. I should have known. I thought you were better than this, but I was wrong. Brooks tried to reach for him, his voice rising with desperation. James, don't be stupid. You're going to get yourself killed, and for what? To expose some corrupt cops? You think the system is going to change? No one cares about the truth. All they care about is power, and you're out of your depth. James's fists clenched. I don't need your approval, Brooks. I don't need anyone's approval. I'm doing this because it's right. And if you're not going to help me, then stay out of my way. With that, James turned and walked out of the diner, his mind racing. The betrayal stung worse than he expected. He had trusted Brooks with everything. They had been partners for years. And now he was the one who was walking away, leaving James to fend for himself. Rethinking everything, as James made his way back to the safe house, his thoughts were a whirlwind. If Brooks, someone he had considered a friend, could betray him so easily, what did that mean for everyone else? He had been so sure that he could count on the people closest to him. But now the walls felt even higher, the pressure even more suffocating. He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even Lila. A new plan. That night, as James sat in the dimly lit room, the weight of betrayal heavy in his chest, he knew something had to change. He had one shot left to expose the truth, and he couldn't afford any more distractions. No more second chances, no more allies. Just him and the evidence. He couldn't let them win. Not like this. No turning back. The betrayal still stung, but James couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not anymore. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now there was only one way out. Fight with everything he had. His mind was made up. There was no turning back. Brooks's words echoed in his ears. You're out of your depth. But those words only fueled James's resolve. He didn't need Brooks. He didn't need anyone but himself and the evidence he had painstakingly gathered. If he was going to expose the corruption, he would do it alone. But this time he had no illusions. He knew the risks. He knew that this could be the last fight of his life, and if it wasn't, the world would never be the same for him. Either way, he couldn't back down. Reaching out to Lila, James had one final card to play. Lila. She had been a true ally from the start, and he needed her more than ever now. But he wasn't sure how much longer he could trust anyone, even her. Could she still be trusted? Would she stand by him, or would she be the next to betray him? He dialed her number, his thumb trembling on the screen. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before she answered. James? Her voice was a whisper, tense. What's going on? You've been off the grid for days. I've been thinking, he began, choosing his words carefully. I'm going after them, all of them. No more hiding, no more games. This is it. Lila, it's time to expose the truth. There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment James thought she might have hung up. But then she spoke, her voice steady but filled with concern. I know you're serious about this, James, but you need to be careful. They're closing in. The people we're up against, they don't play by the rules. They won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to silence you. I know, James replied, his jaw clenched, but I can't live with myself if I don't see this through. Lila exhaled slowly. All right. But you're going to need help. I can't do this alone. Not without backup. James hesitated, unsure of what she meant. What do you mean? I've been in contact with a few people, she said. Some of the people I trust in the shadows of this city. They're willing to help. But it's risky, James. If we do this, there's no going back. Are you ready for that? The weight of her words hung in the air. But James knew, deep down, that there was no other choice. I'm ready, he said. I don't have a choice. Her dangerous plan over the next few days. James and Lila worked tirelessly to put together a plan. They knew they couldn't take down the entire corrupt network at once, but they could start with one key player. The head of the syndicate, the one person who could bring the entire operation down. Lila had managed to secure a location, an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, where they could meet with the informants who had access to the final pieces of the puzzle. It was the perfect place for a secret exchange, away from prying eyes. But even with all the preparation, James knew the risks. Every move they made was one step closer to being exposed, and if they were caught, the consequences would be deadly. Meeting the day of the meeting arrived, and the tension was palpable. James had spent the night in another safe house, knowing that the next few hours would determine everything. He had one shot at this, one shot to make it all right. Lila picked him up early in the morning, her face grim as they drove to the rendezvous. "Point, we don't know who else is involved," she said, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. "There could be people watching us right now. We have to be prepared for anything." James nodded, his stomach in knots. "I'm ready. Let's do this." When they arrived at the warehouse, everything was eerily quiet. The area was deserted, save for a few parked cars. James's heart was pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the world on him, even though no one was there. This was it. The moment everything would either fall into place or crumble. They made their way to the back of the building, where the informants were supposed to meet them. The shadows seemed deeper than usual, the silence heavier. As they approached the entrance, Lila stopped and motioned for James to stay close. She whispered, "I have a bad feeling about this." Before James could respond, a voice cut through the silence. "James?" He froze. It was a voice he didn't recognize, but it was unmistakable, the kind of voice that sent a chill down his spine. "Who's there?" James called out, trying to steady his breathing. A figure emerged from the shadows. James's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Brooks. The unexpected betrayal. James's first instinct was to reach for his gun, but he stopped himself. Brooks was standing there, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "James, I didn't want it to come to this," Brooks said, his voice filled with a strange mix of regret and resolve. "But you left me no choice." "What the hell are you doing here?" James demanded. "I thought you were on my side. You said we were in this together." "I was," Brooks replied, his gaze avoiding James's. "But I've had to make a choice too, and I can't let this happen. You've crossed a line, James. You're going to bring everything down, and not just the department. You'll destroy everything, everyone, even your family. I can't let you do that." James's mind spun. This wasn't the man he thought he knew. Brooks had just confirmed his worst fear. He had been working with the other side all along. "You're betraying me," James said quietly, his voice cold. "You're working with them." Brooks's face hardened. "I never wanted this, James. But you don't understand the bigger picture. You think this is about right and wrong. It's not. It's about survival. The fight for the truth." Before James could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind. Lila appeared holding a weapon in her hand. She was looking at Brooks, her eyes filled with disbelief. You betrayed us?" Lila asked, her voice shaking. Brooks looked at her, his face softening for a moment. "Lila, you don't understand. It's not what you think." But Lila wasn't listening. She took a step forward, raising her gun. "Get out of the way, Brooks, now." James didn't know what to do. The situation had spiraled out of control, and he felt like he was losing his grip on everything. The truth was slipping away. Everything on the line. The air felt thick with tension, like the world itself was holding its breath. James stood frozen, caught between the two people he had trusted most, Lila, who had been his ally from the beginning, and Brooks, who had once been his partner in everything. But now, both of them seemed like strangers to him. The betrayal was too much to process. He had trusted Brooks with his life, and now Brooks was standing there, the very person he thought he could count on, pointing the conversation in a direction that made his skin crawl. Lila's gun was still raised, and Brooks didn't move an inch. The standoff felt like it had lasted hours, but it was only seconds. "Lila," James whispered, his voice low but firm, "put the gun down. We can still work this out. There's a way forward." "Don't tell me what to do, James," she snapped, her eyes cold with distrust. "Do you really think after everything you've gotten us into, that there's a way out? Do you think you can just go back and pretend this is all going to be okay?" Her voice was sharp with bitterness, and it hit James harder than any blow he'd taken before. Lila was scared, just like everyone else, But this wasn't the time for fear. He needed her, now more than ever. "I never asked for any of this," James said, his voice rising slightly. "But I'm not going to walk away from it. The truth has to come out, Lila, all of it." Brooks's eyes shifted between the two of them, his face hardening with each passing second. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "This isn't just about you or about some righteous cause. This is about a system that's so deep, so entrenched, that one person can't tear it down. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than all of us." James's gaze narrowed. "I don't care, I'm not backing down." But deep down, the words weighed heavily on him. Brooks wasn't wrong. James had felt the magnitude of the system closing. It's in on him for days now, the walls getting tighter with each step. But no matter how hopeless it seemed, he couldn't let them win. He wouldn't. A decision to make. The sound of sirens broke the silence, faint but unmistakable in the distance. It was the unmistakable sound of approaching danger. It was too late to escape. "I have to make this right," James said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He looked at Lila, trying to convey his resolve, but her expression hadn't softened. "We don't have time for this," Lila said, her grip tightening on the gun. "Brooks already made his choice. What's left to discuss?" James could see the hurt in her eyes, but there was no time to address it. The sirens were getting closer. They needed to act now. The window of escape was closing fast. Brooks, sensing the same urgency, spoke up. "You don't have much time, James. You're going to get caught. The truth doesn't matter to them. It's just a weapon they use to crush you. They won't stop until you're either dead or in a cell. There's no winning here, not for you." James's chest tightened. The reality of what Brooks was saying sank in. He'd known it from the beginning, that the fight for the truth wasn't going to be easy. But now the brutal consequences of that fight were starting to hit home. Could he really handle the fallout of exposing this much corruption? Could he survive? Lila shook her head as if reading his thoughts. "You've already made this personal, James. We all have. There's no going back now. You either expose it all, or you walk away and save yourself." But there was no walking away. Not for James. If he did that, if he let the corruption stand, he would never be able to live with himself. He made his choice. "I'm doing this," James said firmly. "And if you won't help me, then get out of the way." Brooks's face twisted in frustration. "You really think you can do this alone? You're not prepared. You don't have the resources, the power, "I have the truth," James interrupted, his voice rising with conviction. "And that's all I need." Price to pay before anyone could react. The door to the warehouse burst open, and several armed men stormed in. James recognized them immediately. The same operatives who had been on his tail for weeks now. The ones sent to silence him. It was over. Lila's gun came up, but she hesitated. Brooks grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back. "Lila, don't." "Do it," he warned, his voice urgent. "They're not here to negotiate." But Lila was already moving. She fired a shot, narrowly missing one of the men as they dove for cover. The chaos erupted instantly, bullets flying, echoes of gunfire filling the empty space. James ducked behind a nearby crate, his heart pounding. The sirens were getting louder, the sound now drowning out everything else. "Lila!" he shouted. "Get down!" But Lila was already on her feet, moving quickly as she took out another assailant with a precise shot. Her movements were fluid, professional, but even she couldn't keep up with the sheer number of people coming for them. James knew they were cornered. There was no way out. The last gamble. With no other options left, James made a split-second decision. He grabbed the bag of evidence, the files, the recordings, the proof that would bring everything crashing down, and tossed it to Lila. "Get this to the press," he shouted. "Now, before it's too late." Lila looked at him, her face full of confusion and disbelief. "What are you doing?" "I'm buying you time," James said. "Take the evidence. I'll hold them off." "No," Lila screamed, her voice filled with panic. "I'm not leaving you behind." But James had already made up his mind. He had to buy her the time she needed. If the truth was going to come out, this was the only way. And it would be the price he paid. With one last glance at her, James turned and sprinted toward the back of the warehouse. hoping he could create a diversion long enough for Lila to get away. The price of the truths. James rounded the corner. He heard Lila's voice one last time. Desperate and full of fear. "James, please," she called. But he didn't look back. He couldn't. The truth was worth more than his life, and if he was going to die today, he would die knowing he had done what was right. The calm before the storm. The warehouse was now a war zone. The sound of gunfire echoed through the abandoned building as flashes of muzzle fire illuminated the dark corners. But despite the chaos, one thought rang clear in James's mind. It has to be worth it. He had made a deal with himself long ago that the truth, no matter the cost, was the only thing worth fighting for. But as the world around him descended into mayhem, he couldn't help but wonder, had he made a mistake? Was the truth worth this much? Could it really change anything? Desperate gamble. James's heart raced as he sprinted down the narrow hallways of the warehouse, the sounds of his pursuers' footsteps closing in. He had already bought Lila the time she needed, but now it was his turn to face the consequences of his actions. A part of him knew he couldn't outrun them, not forever. But maybe, just maybe, he could buy enough time for the truth to make its way into the world. He turned a corner and skidded to a stop, coming face to face with a group of armed men. His breath caught in his throat. There was no way around them. He was trapped. The first shot rang out and he dove behind a stack of crates for cover, feeling the heat of the bullet pass inches from his face. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. There was one more thing he needed to do. The final transmission. James's fingers moved quickly as he dialed Lila's number. He didn't know where she was, but he hoped she was still out there, still with him in this fight. The phone rang, and then, at last, she picked up. "James!" Lila's voice was frantic, but she was trying to keep it together. "I've got the evidence. I'm headed to the news station now. You need to get out of there." "I can't," James said, his voice tight. "But you need to make sure this gets out. The whole world needs to see what's in those files. The people we're fighting. They've been lying to everyone, and they can't be allowed to get away with it." Lila's voice wavered, fear creeping into it. "James, this is it, isn't it? You're not going to make it out." James didn't answer right away. His gaze flicked around the room, searching for a way out. But there was none. He could hear them coming for him. "I'll be fine," he said, the words tasting hollow in his mouth. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that he'd made a difference, that his sacrifice would mean something. But as the sounds of the approaching footsteps grew louder, James knew that the reckoning had come. The truth is unleashed outside. The warehouse, the city, was starting to wake up to a new day. But inside, the world was falling apart. Lila had already made it to the press office. The evidence, the files, the recordings, all of it was about to go public. As the first of the news outlets picked up the story, the city's skyline seemed to hold its breath. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same. But the storm was far from over. The final confrontation back in the warehouse, the tension was unbearable. James had no idea how much longer he could hold them off. The door to the storage room crashed open, and several armed men stormed inside. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This wasn't a fight he could win, not with his life anyway. But maybe, just maybe, the truth could win. The first man stepped forward, a smirk on his face. "You really thought you could get away with it, huh?" he sneered. "You really thought you could bring down everything we've built?" James didn't flinch. "The truth doesn't care about what you've built," he said, his voice steady. "It'll tear it down anyway." The man took a step forward, raising his weapon. But before he could fire, a loud crash from the other side of the room made everyone freeze. The police had arrived. The reckoning, it all happened in the blink of an eye. The armed men turned toward the entrance, confused and caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. James took the opportunity to make his move, rushing toward a door on the opposite side of the room. Lila's voice came through, his phone again. "James, the story's breaking, the world's seeing everything." He didn't have time to reply. He couldn't afford to let the law get in his way now. He had one last chance to escape, to make sure the truth was finally out. He pushed through the door, his legs burning from the adrenaline, the sounds of shouting and chaos fading behind him. The police were here. The story was breaking. But James didn't know if he could outrun what was coming next. As he sprinted through the alley, he glanced over his shoulder. The warehouse was still in flames behind him, figuratively and literally. The chaos of the world he had brought down was now coming for him, but he wouldn't stop. Not until he knew the truth had been told. The cost of the truth back at the newsroom. The chaos was unfolding. The story had gone viral, spreading through every social media platform, every news outlet, every corner of the internet. The corrupt empire that had controlled so much for so long was finally being exposed. But that didn't mean the fight was over. James knew the consequences of what had just happened. His name would forever be linked to this scandal. Whether he lived or died, there was no going back. The moment the truth was out, everything changed. His future, his relationships, his very identity, nothing would be the same. But as the news spread, James felt something deep inside him, a sense of peace. He had done the right thing. The cost had been steep, but in the end the truth had come out, and maybe that was all that mattered. The aftermath as the dust settled and the world reacted to the bombshell revelations, James found himself somewhere between fear and relief. The fallout was immediate. Investigations, arrests, a public outcry that rattled the foundations of the system he had tried to expose. The media couldn't get enough of the story, the world watching in disbelief as the corruption he had uncovered spread like wildfire. James's life would never be the same. But in the midst of the chaos, he finally understood something he hadn't before. The truth was powerful, and no matter the cost, it was always worth fighting for. And in that moment, as he stood at the edge of his world, James realized that sometimes the price of the truth is everything. Epilogue. The legacy of truth, James's name became a symbol of courage, of someone who refused to be silenced, even when the stakes were impossibly high. He had risked everything to expose the truth, and in the end the world was forever changed because of it. His story wasn't over, but the beginning of a new chapter had already started, one that was built on truth, on sacrifice, and on the courage to face what others would rather keep hidden. And as the world turned its attention to the aftermath of his actions, one thing was certain: James had made a difference.